Welcome to episode 39 of the Sports Geek podcast. On this week's podcast, we chat with Chris Gross from Fox Sports Australia about social and digital. And we have a chat with pricing expert John Manning.
Welcome to the Sports Geek podcast, the podcast built for the sports digital marketer. And now, here's your host, who claims sneakers on his tax return, Sean Callanan.
Thanks, DJ Joel. My name is Sean Callanan from Sports Geek, and you're listening to the Sports Geek podcast. If anyone from the Australian Tax Office is listening and is wondering why my sneakers are on the tax return, they're all part of the Sports Geek brand strategy. The custom Sports Geek Adidas shoes are my signature, and so they obviously need to be and remain on my tax return to be claimed. Thanks very much for joining me for the Sports Geek podcast this week. Thanks to Anthony and Bart, who actually sent an email from Ireland and Amsterdam saying they've been listening and enjoying the show. So thank you very much, guys. On this week's show, I had a chat with Chris Gross, who formerly was with Vodafone, a telco here in Australia, and is now heading up Fox Sports Australia's social and digital initiatives. So a real change in direction from a customer service focused telco to a content beast that is Fox Sports Australia. So we have a chat about digital initiatives, what they're looking to do, and how they tackle social at Fox Sports. And then later on in the show, primarily off the back of a Beers Blokes Business podcast, we had John Manning on as a guest bloke. He is a pricing expert from Pricing Profits, so I thought I'd invite him on to have a chat about the world of pricing and how it applies in the world of sports around ticketing and packaging and those kind of things, and the different kinds of pricing models that are around. So hopefully you enjoy that chat. And then also later in the show, we've launched the Sports Geek one-day educational. It'll be on March 31st at Honey Bar, but we'll have more about that later in the show. But first up is my discussion with Chris Gross from Fox Sports Australia. Very happy to welcome from Fox Sports Australia, Chris Gross, who's the head of social media and digital marketing at Fox Sports Australia. Welcome to the podcast, Chris.
Cheers, Sean.
So, Chris, you're now, like I just said, head of social media and digital marketing, but previously you got started in social and digital at Vodafone. Do you want to give us a bit of background of your journey to where you are now and what you sort of learnt from the Vodafone experience?
Yeah, sure, Sean. I was actually at a digital agency for a couple of years, and then I made the switch over to Vodafone. My background prior to that was in mobile and social, which I was kind of really, really keen on in around 07, and went across into Vodafone in 08 and did some work in mobile advertising. And after kind of a year of that, the role kind of opened up full-time within social, and I was absolutely dying to get back into that full-time. So I started at Vodafone and kind of working full-time in social in 2009. And, we were really looking at trying to define, I guess, at the start what we were trying to achieve from it. At that time, I think it was a lot of people kind of looking around, kind of trying to figure out, we know it's important, but what are we going to do with it? So for us, that was really about setting the foundations. For us, that was care, first and foremost. As a social brand, you can't really, you can't have a conversation with people if you can't help them first, and particularly with a brand like Vodafone that was customer care oriented, that was really important as a base foundation. The next part for us for that was brand, and that's really around how we're increasing reach and engagement with people. And then the last bit of that journey for us was within sales. So, there's lots of conversations going on in the open web about telcos and phones and things like that, and it was how do we leverage those that can ultimately make the business and money.
And so, that being working for a telco, it's obviously, like you just said, very customer service focused, and then moving to the sales. So, what was the adjustment like for you coming from that experience to now Fox Sports Australia and really being a content house of having all this content that you've got at your fingertips?
Absolutely. Look, it was great for me. First things first was I didn't actually have to hide or minimize the sports screens that I would inevitably have up on my computer or in the top right corner showing the highlight reel. So I didn't have to kind of hide those away. I could be watching those in full screen happily. So that made a good difference into my life from day one. Ultimately, between these businesses, and regardless within a digital or social framework, I see it always as balancing really content, process, and people, and technology as well. Content is the absolute heart of it. We all know that. But the process, people, and technology is really important. At Vodafone, technology-wise, it was very strong. We had a lot of stuff there, and the people and process piece of it was as well. In that regard, by the time I left Voda, we were talking a team of around 35 that were working full-time within social media, and then coming across into Fox Sports, we didn't necessarily have the technology infrastructures of a Vodafone. However, we were content very heavy. We didn't have the size of the resources either. Though again, it was something that we were looking to build out. So, being Fox Sports, having all the content, it was really about how do we unlock this and how do we make this more social. It began around how do we start to teach the business how to do social better. I wish I was an expert in every sport. I'd like to consider that I've got a fair opinion on a fair few of the sports, but I'm certainly not an expert in all the sports. No one can be, and no one can be that within social media. So really what it was about for us was starting to take the experts within the different sports, whether that be the editorial resources or whether that be the producers who are creating the broadcasts, and even sometimes, the guys in stats who are sitting there and coming up with some of these insights and really interesting pieces. How do we teach them social? How do we connect them to the right different micro communities for those sports? How do they ultimately end up interacting more and producing more content that is social at heart that we know is going to work in that space? And that was a really interesting difference in between Vodafone and Fox Sports, and it's been a good challenge that kind of taken up over the last 18 months.
And so, from a Fox Sports point of view, in your role, what's your main drivers? Are you trying to get more people to sign up to subscriptions, to be watching Fox Sports programs, to be consuming content? I know it's a bit of everything, but what is your main driver? Is what you're trying to do from a digital and social point of view?
Yeah, that is an interesting one. Whenever you ask someone that question, they kind of always say, all of the above, please.
Yeah, exactly.
But we never know it's that simple. Look, we've kind of got three major outputs of how we're looking of what social media will move the dial on. From an editorial perspective, we're a big editorial machine within here, and ultimately what that means is traffic. We monetize our properties within foxsports.com.au, and we want to get more and more people there. So from an editorial standpoint, it's about referral traffic from social media, and it's about how we maximize that. The other part from that is, so that's one of them. The other part for us is that we are a broadcaster. So it's about how do we bring what's going on within social media into the broadcast to make that a more compelling product and, more engaging to our viewers. That can be a challenge in terms of how we measure that. We start to look at numbers around increasing share of voice for the program and interactivity, but that's definitely a part that we're looking at as well. And the third part for us is a marketing aspect. So that's about how we're increasing engagement and particularly reach of Fox Sports. And again, a big one there is share of voice, a conversation over sport.
So before you were talking about the technology, what's some of the technology that you're using there to one, measure those kind of things, but what are some of the tools that you guys are using?
We've got a few bits and pieces. We've just migrated over and are just ramping up on a tracking, measuring and publishing tool called Spreadfast, which is out of the States. We really like that aspect of it because it works to our model well of, unlimited seats and being able to ramp up and focus on publishing and content calendars, but still giving us flexibility to be, move these things around. As in the sporting world, Sean, if only 5 or 10 things throw your day kind of sideways in any given 24-hour period, it's probably a slow amount. So we need to be quite agile in that regard, and we're happy with that tool giving it to us. Likewise, the tracking and measuring numbers in there are good. We'll also work with natively, well, I shouldn't say natively, we'll work with the platforms themselves, particularly Twitter, given that it's live TV, and that's really where we're seeing the percentage of conversation being in. So we'll work with those guys to understand how we can unlock some more of the numbers that they see. We're also in the process at the moment of launching our own forum, which should hopefully be live in during March, which will be a fantastic piece. That's powered by Lithium Technologies, and we're really excited to really build something that's going to be the home of conversation on sport in Australia.
So it almost is effectively a little bit old school, like the old is new again. The bulletin boards where a lot of the chatter sort of was happening before social media, but now social is getting so noisy, and if you really want to dive into a conversation on Super Rugby or the A-League, you want that conversation to be happening back at Fox Sports?
Yeah, absolutely. We would like that ideally. Look, the consumers are empowered. They can have that conversation where they choose to. The other thing is, it's what type of consumers are we looking for? Within Facebook, it's, we're trying to create very frictionless, positive experiences where someone can get a bit of information very quickly within a value exchange. They can go check out an article. They can vote on who the top player was on the weekend. Where we are then looking within our experience that someone wants to have a deeper experience, more of a robust conversation, whether that be with our editorial teams or maybe with some of our presenters, or whether it is just with like-minded, passionate sporting fans who are knowledgeable. We see that as a logical place as being somewhere within the forums.
And so in the same way that sports teams, we talk about sports teams developing their fan base and sort of taking along that digital journey and using social to sort of accelerate that. And, at the end point, there's the member or the season ticket holder, as people in the States would call them, that, hands over their credit card and they just keep renewing every year. You would have that same sort of customer escalator from a Fox Sports fan point of view. Is there particular, do you target these specific products or particular platforms at those kind of fans to say, we want these, those super avid fans that are talking all the time about that sport, they're the guys that are going to be in our forum, whereas the casual fan that's just watching, the nines or whatever it might be on at that time, they're just we want to take them and try to move them along that chain to become more avid and more involved with what you guys are doing?
Definitely. Look, we talk if we can be, people who just generally follow sport, if we can make them, more of a fan of a sport or a club, and from there, they start to really get into it, and they then become kind of, a fanatic about that sport or that club. That's a great thing, and they will be having those deeper experiences. So yeah, we're definitely looking at shifting people along through that where possible. And the interesting thing, I think, from a Fox Sports perspective as well, is that that's going to happen at a myriad of levels, I guess, across different sports. So, someone can be an absolute fanatic on football, and they're sitting there in the stands of Western Sydney Wanderers every weekend. But how does that translate then to one of the traditional winter codes, or is that person just into football? And hopefully, we can give them kind of those experiences and different experiences across the different sports.
And I guess that's the other component that you've got this umbrella brand that is Fox Sports Australia, but then you've got these, I guess, micro or sport based brands. You want to sort of like, what kind of platforms are you on, and sort of having that strategy of, we are going to dive down and do specific stuff for the football community or for the AFL community or for the NRL community?
Yeah, so we're across within Facebook. We have kind of Fox Sports Oz as an umbrella brand that covers all sports. We then have our core sports have their own Facebook pages as well. That is Fox Footy, Fox NRL, Fox Rugby, Fox Cricket, Fox Football. We then have Fuel, which is our racing channel, and we also have Fuel, which is our surfing and extreme channel. Some of the MMA stuff within there as well, and then we also have Speed, which is our racing channel. Within Twitter, for those environments, we have again a very similar format across umbrella brand, and then we have, I guess, the core sports within it. We also have, for all of those sports, a shadow account, which is the live account. Now, really what the live account is, and this is where it differs slightly in between Facebook and Twitter for us, is our live account is really looking at the fanatics. So that is a huge volume of content that comes across it, and, that is all the news articles that is coming through it within a day about that sport. That is live games on the weekends. It's live during the magazine shows or the entertainment shows during the week. It's live chats with players when they come in. It's a large volume. It was really quite interesting when we started. We were thinking, well, is it too much to have two accounts per sport within Twitter? Will there be some cannibalization in there, or are people just going to get annoyed with it? And we actually, we did a test by essentially, going dormant on one and starting to use it as a go-between in between the ways they were both used previously. And, we saw that the numbers were badly affected from it. They're two separate audiences within there, and that's the strategy which we've kind of pushed forward going ahead.
So when you've got, like you were just saying then, when you've got all of these platforms, I know you've done the work to skill up your editorial staff to help manage these platforms, and especially in those smaller sports. But how do you're using tools like Spreadfast to try to push out as much content as possible? But what's your resourcing sort of situation look like to manage all of these different properties?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, look, we've got a big footprint. It's 30 plus odd accounts with a forum about to launch, and with our personalities that we help on within here, that's about another 40 accounts within there. So the resourcing's pretty slim. I was talking about Vodafone Days. I had a team of 35 in total full-time on social media. I really kind of that's what we were doing there was more around building a social brand. And ultimately, that's around resources that are largely siloed from the rest of the organisation, working away in what they're doing, but they're not necessarily connected into being able to affect change within the product or service that they are working on. And they're largely trying to push marketing type of metrics. Within what we're doing here, we're definitely trying to go down the social business route, which is more about teaching people. So we have a very we have a pretty agile and small team that works on that. Within that includes a social media manager. The role of social media manager is really just to go around and teach the business how to do things better. It's about that person is setting frameworks and content themes that can then work across different sports, and then having the editorial people and the broadcast people who are able to pick those up and run with those, and then they can evolve it.
Yeah, so you're just trying to extend the skill set of your editorial and TV production people, so because the content that comes from their point of view and directly from their room is far better than having someone just keeping an eye on what's happening and trying to report on it. It's much better, coming from that team themselves.
Absolutely, and when we're trying to cover dozens of sports at any given time that's going on around the world, there's no way that we're going to be able to do that through one single person. So that person's role is about make everyone else better. It's not necessarily a tangible output, if you will, from that person. It is how are you helping everyone, so together we're getting better, and we're really seeing a big improvement across all the accounts.
And so, if your LinkedIn is correct, you are looking for another social media manager?
Guilty, yes. We are looking for a social media manager at the moment. We've lost our faithful Buckle Up. Luke Buckle is heading into the startup land, so we are looking for a social media manager at the moment to go sit alongside the community manager that we've got in there that will be running the forum and our CRM manager. And
so that becomes like the question that we sort of had and the discussion we had before we started the convo is where do you find that people? Because you're in a similar spot with a lot of sports teams. There'll be people like you and me. Hey, I'm a big sports fan. I'm a geek. I love Twitter. Oh, I can do that. So it makes it very hard for you to, one, find the right person to fit that role. Is there any particular way that you've done in the past couple of years, both at Vodafone and now at Fox, on how you can best find the right person for the role?
Yeah, look, it is a challenge. I know I'm not going to get someone who can tick the boxes in their experience of everything that I'm after. We're looking at someone who's worked within broadcast in shows and how they integrate social media into that, including the technology that delivers that through Viz integration, which is some complex pieces, through to someone who has worked within social media, specifically within channels like Facebook and Twitter, setting content, but also, measuring the output of those. Through to someone who's worked with editorial teams and, some of the opportunities that come with that, as well as challenges, to steer those guys on what best practice is, as well as taking care of marketing aspects of campaigns that come through. So it's a huge variety within this role. So I know, sadly, I'm not going to get someone that's going to be able to tick all those boxes. Really what I hope to do or what we've done traditionally and how I'll approach it this time is that we're really looking at someone that can tick a fair chunk of those boxes, and then we're hiring off capabilities, how we kind of go through that, and obviously a cultural fit as well is a big part for us. How essentially we go through that is that generally the process involves we sit down with those people, we have a bit of chat, see if we're on the same page length, and we end up, sitting in front of a whiteboard for about half an hour, and we start to kind of draw and plot different things and really unpack how that person's brain works. I think once you have those capabilities and the right way of thinking, and it's important to mention here, the right way of thinking isn't necessarily the same way that I think or the same way that someone else in my team thinks. We like to sit here and argue things out and, disagree because we get to a better solution. So getting someone who can bring something to the table in that regard, then, that's really what we're looking for. And for us, that's not about necessarily rushing the person here. Don't get me wrong. I would love the ultimate candidates to be starting tomorrow. That would take a lot of stress off my life. But, we will wait for the right person to come along. And we've done that in the last few roles, and we're definitely reaping the benefits of it now.
And I think one thing that you got to be mindful of, and especially if you're applying for the role, and Chris's details for LinkedIn and Twitter will be in the show notes for this podcast, is that there is a difference between just being a sports fan and then jumping into working in sports, especially if you haven't worked in sports before. Just the ups and downs and the highs and lows. You're not running a team account, which is definitely that roller coaster, but you do get to see the the highs and lows of big events, and with stacks of big sports events coming up. It is a lot of fun, but just because you're getting to watch sports all the time, it doesn't mean it's all fun all the time. There's a lot of hard work that goes in. That's part of it.
Without a doubt, as you'd know, Sean, it's no 2 days are the same, and you can get some. And whilst the sport's large and enjoyable, you can get some pretty stressful ones. Thus, it needs to be someone who's pretty high octane kind of problem solver. Really is what we're looking at within there. That can work on multiple things at once, but is comfortable when ultimately your day falls apart because several things at the last minute change or news breaks within our area.
And how much is that role becoming more of almost a finder for editorial? We're seeing things break and happen on whether it be Twitter or Facebook. We saw Derek Jeter announce his retirement on Facebook just a couple of weeks ago. How much, because especially from a digital point of view and getting that content out, and to a certain degree, Fox Sports competes with a bunch of my clients in the sports space because you're all trying to, outbreak each other. How much is that social media manager like, hang on, guys, stop everything, stop the presses if we're still doing that type of thing, to say this story's breaking, we've got to be the first to put up an article and put up a gallery and get that news article out because that's how you get that traffic. Absolutely.
Look, what I would say in that is that it's not that person's specific role to be doing that all the time because they can't. I unfortunately, or actually I should say fortunately, I wouldn't want to work with a robot, but, they can't be sitting there 24/7 looking at it across every single sport. There's just too much content. So we've got a big editorial team downstairs. We've got some very, very smart and fantastic TV broadcast producers who create great television, but they also are, right into their social too. So it's about how they work with those guys to make them aware of what's going on. Now, how they do that is really within the technology and the process side of things. So it's from a basic thing about getting someone, making sure if they're not already set up, that they are set up and they've got their Twitter lists in the right way, and maybe they're going above and beyond Twitter lists, and we're starting to pull from multiple different channels into a single kind of thread that they can be looking at. Then we start to break those out in between verified accounts and then what the general kind of public is also saying and how news is moving. So it's about really kind of help for the social media manager. It's about how do you make all of those guys more efficient and get them using the tools in a better way, because then that way, when something breaks, it is the NRL lead who has seen this thing come out, and he's suddenly very quickly getting his team swinging towards it for the right outcome, as opposed to the social media manager was in a meeting for an hour and
you've missed it. You've missed it.
Exactly,
yeah, exactly.
Right.
Well, thank you very much, Chris, for joining me. And as I said, please hit up Chris via LinkedIn or hit him up on the Twitter if you are interested in the role. If I hear of anybody looking for a role, I'll definitely pass them on.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Cheers.
Thanks, Sean.
Sign up for Sports Geek News at sportsgeekhq.com/sign up now.
Thanks again to Chris Gross. He's still looking for that social media manager. We had that chat earlier in the week. Send him a tweet at the Chris Gross or connect with him on LinkedIn asking him about that role in Sydney. Because I've got the two interviews, it's a really action-packed episode today. Now I'm going to jump into my discussion with John Manning from Pricing Profits on pricing and sports and where it all fits. Very happy to welcome pricing expert John Manning to the podcast. Welcome to the Sports Geek Podcast, John.
Thanks, Sean. It's I feel like I haven't left the place.
Yes, so if you haven't listened, I actually had John on the Beers, Blokes and Business podcast. So if you really want to get into pricing, we have a really good discussion with John on that. But I wanted to get John back for the Sports Geek podcast to sort of look at pricing from a sports point of view. So first of all, John, give us a bit of background of yourself and how you sort of came into the space of being a pricing expert.
Sure. I guess I started off my career in the oil industry, pricing petroleum products. Still couldn't figure out where those prices came from, so moved into pricing catering for an airline in Australia that's now defunct. That was all cost plus, so that wasn't really very exciting. Then moved into pricing the airfares, which was a little bit more exciting, but still the prices were a bit like the oil industry, coming out of a bit of a black box.
But the airline industry, I guess, is probably the one that's best known for, what is a buzz term now, this dynamic pricing.
Absolutely, and I think the airlines have broken ground for a lot of industries, whether it's dynamic pricing, whether it's packaging and bundling with accommodation and things like that, and their loyalty programs as well. So, so many industries, are looking at, how did the airline industry develop their frequent flyer programs, and there are examples of frequent flyer programs that are more valuable than the airlines that run them.
Yeah. So we had the guys. I spoke to Larry from Store Financial on EP31, and he comes from a retail background, and the same thing. The fact that they've been doing loyalty for so long, it's something now that sports are starting to catch up on as far as the data capture point of view, but then also, understanding their fans. So what I wanted to talk to you about is, I guess, trying to get a better grip on, for all the listeners, on the different types of pricing models that currently sports are pretty much rolling out now around membership or season ticket holders to pitch those packages, and then also single game tickets. So two of the terms, and in episode 21 I sort of spoke about what the Clippers were doing in educating their fans, because part of pricing is education, and they spoke about variable pricing and dynamic pricing. So do you want to just sort of take us through what your definitions of those two would be?
Well, I think you can even put an umbrella over the all of the pricing models in the sports business, and it's all about segmentation. So you have different types of members or fans. Your members, you can sell subscription models, and then or season tickets, and within those there are different categories of subscriptions, and depending on where you're sitting, what other value adds might be offered in part of those subscriptions. And we spoke about it the other day, the bronze, silver, and gold. They're all legitimate sort of models for the membership options. With the sort of game day stuff, what we're increasingly seeing, and it's probably being driven by the US and a lot of the sports clubs there, is to actually try and to price their seats more dynamically, taking into account an incredibly wide range of factors, including who's in the team, who's out of the team, where the opposition is on the league, in the ladder, and so forth, what big names are in the side, as well as the other factors like where the seat is in the stadium.
And historical sales and
historical sales,
team rivalry, that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
So is that, and so how much do you think has the pricing market in sports developed over the past 10 years with the advent of things like StubHub, setting up that secondary market so you can really monitor that supply and demand?
I think that that those platforms that allow the secondary market have been maybe a bit of a wake-up call for the teams to say, people are valuing certain tickets, certain passes, whatever the case may be, at a value higher than what you're putting on it. And in simple terms, that's leaving money on the table. So I think some of the clubs have gone, some of the teams have gone, well, I can do StubHub myself, or I can develop my own sort of secondary market option. And we've seen clubs in Australia do that. But I think, when StubHub first emerged, was a really interesting model that I kept my eyes on. It was a bad name for the incumbents in the industry and so forth, and they've now sort of transformed themselves into a legitimate force within the business in the industry that provides value.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen now that the NBA have got their own ticketing site for their own reseller platform to sort of bring it in house. So how do you back to the education side, and if I put my fan hat on, how do you go about explaining to the fan that the game on a Tuesday night versus a low performing team you can get at a certain price, but then when the star comes to town you have to pay another price, weighing that against the season ticket holder? Like, you don't want to be showing your season ticket holder that they could have got those seats in a discount. So there's that, how much deeply discounted those lower end ones are, whether you can trim the fat or really recoup the costs on those marquee games.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you just mentioned cost. I think that's one thing that clubs don't necessarily want to talk about, because as we spoke in the other podcast, people don't care about costs. They care about the value they are getting. Let's not forget that where the airlines are today took them 40 years to get to. It came about from the deregulation of the airline industry in the US around 1978, and it hasn't taken 40 years, but sometime after that, people started to accept that prices would fluctuate according to demand and supply and things like that. And the airlines have been really successful in building fences that differentiate the price of a cheap ticket to the price of a more expensive ticket. And often it's around things like refundability, advance purchase, and so forth. So it's some of those things which I call fences between the different inventory at different prices that the clubs need to start emphasising to their members and their fans and so forth, to build that rationale for the difference in the price, as well as some of the physical factors. Airlines have physical and non-physical fences, if you like. So the non-physical fences are things like the advance purchase and refundability and so forth. The physical fences are the part of the aircraft you're sitting in. You're sitting at the pointy end, or you're sitting down the back end and so forth. So they need to look at both those physical and non-physical features.
So from to separate the variable pricing from the dynamic pricing, what's the difference between those two? Like, we sort of saw the NRL do variable pricing with some of their state of origin over the last couple of years?
I think it's probably just the magnitude of the dynamism. You know, one of the things that grates for me a little bit about pricing is there's actually no dictionary of pricing, and what some people may call variable pricing, others would call dynamic pricing. But I think it's just the magnitude, the continuum. So what the NRL did a couple of years ago was price state of origin seats here in Australia at 3 tiers. You know, so if you book by such and such time, you got one price, and then it went up and so forth. But that could transform into more dynamic pricing according to the section.
So traditionally, that would be variable. So it's like if you buy by this date, it's this. And puts that time-sensitive pressure on the person to buy the ticket, and then as it gets closer, you end up paying full retail.
Absolutely.
But what they could do in the future is potentially once they hit that full retail, if the demand keeps coming, that full retail price could fluctuate, and that would be more in tune with what most people would call dynamic pricing, to say, well, the demand is higher. This is now what the price of that ticket is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've spoken about this off air. There's also questions about whether ticketing platforms are built for that sort of thing. Whether the stadiums want to do it. Some stadiums are in public hands and don't necessarily want to go down that path. Others in private hands, and they're good candidates for doing that sort of stuff.
And so, I guess one of the key things, when you're looking at figuring out how to price, what kind of data factors are some of the key ones that you look at from a sports point of view, or from any point of view, but from a sports point of view that start telling you where you can adjust these prices?
So I think it's starting to become very technology heavy now, and with that technology comes algorithms and so forth. So there are, particularly in the US, there are a couple of platforms that have these algorithms that use a lot of historical data. They're sort of slightly different from other software platforms that are out in the marketplace because of the membership structure. It's not as commercial as the more commercial type businesses. Extracting money from passengers for airfares and so forth is a different strategy from extracting money from people who are lifetime members.
Yep.
So that's certainly one factor. And some of those other factors you mentioned before, the historical sales, all that sort of stuff, the weather, and also, the match record last season, the season before, and so forth.
And it is partly also understanding who your fans are.
It comes back to that segmentation.
Because, I know from an AFL point of view, Collingwood was one of the first teams to move from the full season ticket member. So in Australia, a full season ticket member would be either an 18 game for all games or an 11 game for home games only. And they went and surveyed their fans to see how many fans couldn't go to 11 games, and that's why they hadn't signed up. And their data came back and said there would be fans who were willing to go to some games who just wanted to support the club. So they modified their membership product, and I guess this is a packaging strategy from a pricing point of view, to offer that 3-game membership. And then there were a few clubs that followed suit, but probably didn't do the same amount of research, and saw some of their membership categories cannibalised and downgraded, rather than filling up that new segment. So it is as much knowing your fan, and knowing the value proposition of your fan. So if you've got a fan that's really hard on the value proposition, they might be interested in that smaller package, or they might be interested in that variable Tuesday night, they're a cheaper ticket type of one, because that's their key value proposition.
Absolutely. And I always say that the single point of failure in pricing is the customer or the member. If you don't get it right, they're just not going to buy, or they're going to downgrade from the 11 game to the 3 game plan.
Okay. And so I guess one of the things looking at the US and the UK to Australia, one of the things, and I've bought tickets on StubHub and I've spoken to guys that are using dynamic ticketing strategies in the US, and it's still developing here in Australia. What do you think are the factors in why that hasn't sort of kicked on here in Australia just yet?
So there's probably a couple of things I've already mentioned. The who owns the venues and so forth, and the degree of technical capabilities in the ticketing platforms and so forth. But I would think that there's probably a third one, and that's around the appetite for risk. I see a lot of companies, particularly outside of sport, that are reluctant to change their approach to pricing because they think it's all or nothing. It's big bang, but they don't have to do that. One of the great ways would be to experiment with differential pricing in the NAB Cup, for example. The pre-season competition, or probably not so much in the FA Cup in the UK because that's such a big competition and a fantastic competition. But picking some of those those less important games and trying something there. Yep. I remember a couple of years back we were both at a networking event where there was someone from Collingwood talking. Yep. And I asked a question because that was the year the Gold Coast Suns were joining the competition, and yep. my team were playing them the following weekend. And I asked him, why should I have to pay anything at all when my team, who is at the top of the ladder, towards the top of the ladder at that time, were playing the team that was on the bottom. And he didn't really have a good answer for me for that. And in that game we kicked a record first quarter score in the first 20 minutes.
And but it is a matter of the quality of the opposition, and that's your proposal to say it wasn't that much of a value, but their systems weren't in place to be able to offer a different price. And
it was an interstate team playing a Melbourne team, so the stadium was never going to be full. So, things like, bring a friend or kids get in for free and stuff like that.
I mean, part of it is, like you said, the stadium deals that are currently in place that are quite restrictive, and they were signed years before any of these pricing deals come in. I think the other thing from an Australian to a US comparison is, I guess, just the volume of
size
games.
Of the market.
And the fact that there is, for an NBA, there's 80, 82 or 41 home games, so there's a lot of tickets available. Absolutely. Baseball is a classic example that does a lot with the amount of games that they have. So there's always options available. Whereas the other thing from an Australian point of view, we've got these big stadiums that that they're not full, so there's not that super demand.
Yeah, which means that on top of all those variables like the weather, the players, and so forth, you've got these two economic things called demand and supply.
Yeah, and at the moment we have they have the MCG down the road, and it seats 100,000, and by and large most weeks you can walk up and get a ticket. So it's a cultural thing of I know I can walk and get a ticket. Now there's they're moving towards more fully ticketed games, and I think as that continues to grow, then the options of how you get that ticket. We saw at the Australian Open had their own ticket marketplace this year as a way to, you've bought a ticket, you want to put it back on, have it as that secondary market. But I still think it's primarily an education thing. I mean, currently we are seeing the AFL proposing to look at blockbuster tax for some of the, and that's how it's been phrased in the, that might be more media, referring to it as blockbuster tax, and it's not going to be well received by fans if that's how it gets pitched.
And that comes back to that, how do we communicate this to members and so forth? You don't go and communicate it as a tax. So, you actually might start with the education of the media. It was interesting, I went to the T20 game at the MCG last Friday night, England versus Australia, or Australia versus England, and sort of going through the barriers at the MCG, it sort of struck me that there's been a lot of investment made in producing the tickets and scanning the scanning technology to get in there, but not necessarily a lot in what people are being paid to go through those turnstiles and so forth. And one thing we haven't talked about, which we spoke a lot, I'm sure Troy Kirby is listening, and we talked a fair bit about that in his Sports Tower
podcast,
Google Hangout a couple of months ago, was this idea of bundling up a hot dog, a drink, a soda, whatever the case may be, with some of those tickets. I took my son in, and we grabbed chips and
and again,
and drink and so forth.
And so yes, and again that pricing and packaging are pretty much interlinked. So it's not just you're not just getting it allows you to attract the value, the value-based customer of seeing, I get a ticket and 4 hot dogs and 4 Cokes and
absolutely. And how easy would it be to scan that barcode at the bar or the?
Well, yeah, and the stadiums are getting up to speed with that, but the problem is, from an Australian point of view, at least, that
concessions within the
stadium are a stadium deal, and they're not tied to the venue hire and stuff like that. So that's the other thing from a ticketing point of view that the US teams have an advantage on, is that they can package up that thing. I think I was listening on Troy's podcast, Steve DeLay, talking about, having a ticket that had an all-you-can-eat.
Yeah.
And you can eat as many hot dogs as you can, and they sold out that block with that specific ticket. So, that's another strategy. Another strategy is, pricing options that you've got around group ticketing and what you can offer from a group point of view. So I guess my main thing in several discussions I've had with you is that pricing's not one. It's not one thing. It's not just the dollar figure at the bottom.
It's more holistic than that. Yeah, and you go from there. From the hot dogs and the sodas and so forth. You then start to think about the merchandising, and then you can even think about your interstate supporter base. And can you assist them with accommodation and so forth, and make their trip to see a game at a team on an away game even more special some way or another.
Yep. Well, thank you very much for joining me on the podcast. I will link to you at Pricing Profits, your San Pre on Twitter, which will be linked in the show notes, and also linked to the other podcasts you've done with Troy. But thanks for coming on.
Pleasure.
Learn from Sports Geek at our Sports Geek ODE one-day educational. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/ODE.
Thanks again to John Manning from Pricing Profits for joining me in at Sports Geek HQ. Apologies for a little bit of the background noise. I share my offices with other creatives, and it is a photography studio, so sometimes the studio is booked, and it does take a lot of noise to take a few photos, especially when there's kids involved. So I hope it wasn't too distracting. As DJ Joel said there in the little bumper, Sports Geek ODE, the one-day educational, just a quick take on the cricketing one-day international, is a one-day workshop we're hosting at Honey Bar on March 31st. So if you want to come along, if you want a refresher in all things social, digital, and how you're using all the platforms, more than welcome to see plenty of sports teams there. It's really a broader workshop, so if you know someone who's struggling with their social presence, trying to get it working for their business, or they work in the marketing department and don't quite understand how their business or their brand can use social, that's exactly what this workshop is intended for. Additionally, I'll have 2 really smart blokes coming along, Josh Rowe and Steve Sammartino. I've had Sammer on the podcast before. He's the guy behind the Lego car. So they're going to come in, and we're going to have a chat with them about what they've done with social, what they understand from a digital strategy point of view, and how they've applied it in businesses that they've worked with. So simply go to sportsgeekhq.com/ODE to check it out. And even if you don't want to go, if there is someone you think might benefit from going, I'd love it if you could share it with them. So last week's sound of the game was, and it got a good response. It was a bit of silence, a bit of a stab at the Olympic Organising Committee for protecting their content so much and not letting content go out. So I got a good response from that. I'm not going to name where this sounds came from. I'm just going to say the people cheering might be watching people wearing spandex and a lot of bedazzling.
Sports Geek Sounds of the Game.
And hopefully that does not get me in trouble. Again, if you've got a Sounds of the Game, if you're at a game, whether it be football, cricket, pre-season, doesn't matter. Simply take your phone out, record a snippet and send it to me at Sean@sportsgeekhq.com. I'd love to include more sounds of the game, and as I start attending a few more games with footy season around the corner, I will have some myself. That's about it for this week's episode. I think I've covered off everything.
Social media post of the week.
Thank you, DJ Joel. It is time for the social media post of the week. And this week, I'm going to give it to the Geelong Cats, Geelong Football Club, on Twitter this week. Their stadium, known as the Cattery, or Skilled Stadium, I think it's called at the moment, was hosting St Kilda versus the Western Bulldogs in a pre-season game. And there was a flash flood, and the whole stadium was pretty much flooded just before the game was about to get started. And the Cats quite cheekily sent out a tweet saying, "It's the last time we loan out the category. You won't be getting your bond back, Western Bulldogs and St Kilda." St Kilda were quick with a reply saying, "No issues with us. We'll stick to the joint with the roof from now on. Thank you very much." As they play at Etihad Stadium, and they never have to play in rain because they've got a roof on the top of the stadium. But Geelong Cats, and a shout out to Tom Peters, who drives the Geelong Twitter account, very quick with the reply. If only the 2009 grand final was under a roof. Hey, just sort of giving it to the St Kilda faithful who lost that close grand final in 2009. So kudos to the Geelong Cats on Twitter there. Nice bit of byplay for the fans. That is the wind-up clock that tells me to dedicate this episode and get out because this one has run long. And apologies if you're running and waiting for the end of the episode. I'll get out. This is episode 39. You can find the show notes at sportsgeekhq.com/39. I did put out nominations to Twitter, but there's only one person I thought I could nominate this to, and that'd be the Wiz, Warwick Capper, 80s AFL or VFL on that stage, football star, was the pride of Sydney town. I'll include a YouTube clip of Warwick Capper in his short shorts and high-flying marks. He's still bobbing up trying to keep his name in the news, but I'm going to dedicate this episode to Warwick Capper, and who knows, he might retweet this episode if he's on Twitter. That's it for this week's show. Again, one final plug from, you can connect with all the guests, including Chris and John from this episode. Thanks, guys. Simply go to sportsgeekhq.com/SGP episodes or SGP guests to get a list of the episodes and the guests. That's right, DJ Joel. It's time for the closing 2 cents. And it sort of comes from our discussion last week with Daniel McLaren on hashtags. Had a bit of traction with that with a few people. So I thought I'd use it as my closing 2 cents. Now, there's no right way to tweet. But here is my take on sports business hashtags. SportsBiz is for all things sports business. DigiSport is for all things in the sports digital space, content, activations, engagement, social media. And then SM Sports is specifically for activations and contents on social media. There's no right way, but that's my way. Hashtag just saying. Cheers.
Please leave a review on iTunes. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/iTunes. Find all Sports Geek podcasts at sportsgeekhq.com/SGP. Want to maximize returns from your digital team? Contact Sports Geek about content and commercialization workshop. Thanks for listening to the Sports Geek Podcast.